I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, first of all. This has been a really great weekend of networking, and I've learned a lot. I really am so inspired by you guys, and I hope you're feeling the same way about the people you're meeting and the things that you're hearing. So I just want to do a quick recap of where we are. Hopefully the slides are working. We heard on Saturday about the activation point and how we need to remember that it can be anybody that starts the movement and starts the activities that get us to saving all the animals that are coming into the shelter. And that can be somebody that's leading the shelter, it can be a volunteer, it can be a staff person. Anyone in the whole community can get this going. And I think we've seen that. There's so many options out there of what people have done and made such a huge difference. We also learned about not having fights about no kill. Like there is nothing to fight about anymore. We're at a point where it's no longer if this is going to happen, it's how and when it's going to happen. And I would encourage us to keep remembering that and to keep moving forward and not waste our time fighting about the if anymore, because it is a waste of time. It's possible because it's already happening, and we need to keep remembering that. That no more fighting at weddings about whether or not no kill is going to happen. You can fight about other stuff, but not that. And then we heard from Kristen Arbach about how the world is changing, and our sheltering system needs to start changing with it. We're still operating out of an 1800s model and trying to make it work, and we're better than that. We need to shift the paradigm and make changes that save lives. So that's where the rubber hits the road, and this session is about giving you the tools to turn inspiration and your vision into action. And it's hard. That's the hardest part about it. All of us want this, but the hardest part is actually making it happen. And I've invited David Meyer here from Adopt a Pet to talk with us because he's helped me see my way when I was feeling lost, and I think he'll be really helpful to you for defining actions and how do you measure your goals and how do you look at those best practices and turn them into measurable goals for yourself. So you know at the end of the next decade that you've made a huge impact on what you're trying to accomplish and not wondering if it worked. So I'm going to introduce David Meyer.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks. So as Ellen said, my name is David Meyer. I am the co-founder and CEO of AdoptAPet.com, which I assume many of you know about. It's a nonprofit organization, and through the development of AdoptAPet.com, I've had the really good fortune to learn some things that have been really helpful for us that I think will be also really helpful for you. We happen to be a technology product, and so there's a lot of people in Silicon Valley with a lot of business skill who've really helped us understand how to set goals and how to think about things. And I also have this other background, which some of you may know about from a presentation I did last year, which is this martial arts background. And I train and compete and am actually a world champion in something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I only mention that not to tell you I'll break your wrist if I see you on a cell phone right now, but I might. No, I tell you that because that's also very much focused towards having a very clear goal, but being very adaptive on how you get there. So that kind of set the stage with me for being ripe for this kind of stuff. And what I've learned is the things that we're going to talk about today, if you can, if you're not already doing them, if you can bring them into your operations, they can be what makes a team that's equally committed as another team excel and be better. Because that's always a question. Everybody's working really hard. Why are some people seemingly getting more accomplished? It almost always has to do with the stuff that we're going to talk about today, with measurements and goals. So let's take an analogy here, okay? Let's think of your journey and your organization's journey to save animals like you're in a car. You're on a ride, okay? So if I was to ask you, how's it going, right? You could give me an answer. You could say we're doing fine, we're not doing fine, we have a sense that we're frustrated, right? But think about it. You can't really answer that question unless you have answered this question. Where exactly are you trying to get to? So if someone's on a journey and I say, how's your trip going? And they're not clear where they're trying to get, how can they even answer that question about where they're trying to go? If they can't answer the question if they haven't said when they're trying to get there, right? So if you say, yeah, I'm driving to Seattle, and I say, when do you need to be there by? And I'm like, I don't know, in a year. Well, then I guess your trip is going great, right? But if you say I need to be there tomorrow, we have a serious problem and we've got to change your mode of transportation. So when you think about how your organization is doing, you've got to be very clear on where it is you're trying to get to, when you're trying to arrive, and lastly, you have to have some measurement of how fast you're going, right? In the car, it's a speedometer, or it's the odometer also telling you. So without that measurement, you don't have a gauge of understanding, are we on track or not on track? And if you don't know if you're on track, you don't know if you need more resources or if you need to change your efforts. So that analogy is going to hold through on everything we talk about. Does that make sense? Okay? And it's important to remember that. So what you want to accomplish, sort of the map of where you're trying to go, that's your goal. That's your highest level goal, okay? And you want that goal to be measurable. So if I were to ask you, what are your organization's goals, and you say to help animals, well, if you fed your cat this morning when you got out of bed, you helped animals, so I guess you met your goals this year, right? So measurable goals, things that are specific. I always like the phrase, no one reaches the top of Mount Everest without actually knowing that that's their goal, right? So you can go out on a mountain and hike, but if you know your goal is to get to the top, you're more likely to do what? Get to the top, okay? Well, we're trying to get to the top of something. We're trying to save animals. We're trying to create a no-kill nation, a no-kill community. Being very clear on what it is we're trying to do, that's the goal. And the timeline is important too, of understanding when you want to do it. And so for most organizations, they'll have annual goals and maybe a multi-year strategic plan. So that sets where you want to go, when you want to get there by, and your measurement of how you're going to get there. So measurable goals are really good to have, okay? So I keep saying measurable goals, so you understand what I mean by that, right? Something that you can say, we've achieved this number, or we achieved this by this date, where there's no question about whether you've achieved it or not, okay? It gives focus. So we're all so busy. We could be doing a lot of different things, but if our organization is really clear that this is our priority and this is what we're going to try to do, it allows the staff and the different departments to understand, do focus on this, don't focus on that. Otherwise, everyone will focus on everything, and that's no focus at all, right? So having a clear goal provides focus. Having a clear goal reminds us of our purpose. We know that we're here to save animals. We know that every day. Everybody in your organization knows that. But when your team can get together and understand the reason we're doing this, the reason we're trying this new program, the reason we're trying this new way of doing things is we are going to try to meet this goal by this date, suddenly everybody has a purpose, and it reminds them of why we're taking these actions that maybe sometimes they might otherwise resist. Okay? Urgency. By setting a date on it, it reminds us that this is something that we want to get done on time. We don't want to miss the deadline of it. And it pulls people together to not say, yeah, this is good to do, but we'll do it another time. We're doing it now because we're trying to meet that goal. Okay? It fosters camaraderie, I hope I spelled that right, in a team. Okay? So once the organization is very clear that what you're trying to get, and everyone has buy-in that, yeah, we're going to actually try to achieve this thing, whether it's a particular change in your live release rate or a particular number of adoptions this year. Once everyone's clear, it becomes harder for people on the team to say, no, I don't want to be a part of that. Because now they're on a team and everyone's trying to row in the same direction. So it brings that camaraderie. And it gives you a chance for celebration, right? If you achieve the goal. Now, not all goals can be achieved, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when you do get those wins, you actually get something to celebrate. Otherwise, it's just the daily grind of working hard, and that can burn people out. But having those moments of, we set a tangible goal, we achieved it, we can have a little party, we can pat ourselves on the back, those are refreshing moments that rejuvenate people. So I want to talk about stretch goals. Okay? So a stretch goal is a term for a goal that's not easy, not impossible. Okay? So we'd have to stretch to make it. Maybe we'll make it, maybe we won't make it. Okay? So just a real quick example here from my world. AdoptAPet.com has started this program called Rehome, where if someone comes to your shelter trying to drop off a pet, you can send them to Rehome, and Rehome will try to help them keep the pet, otherwise foster a connection to them with someone who can adopt. So your organization gets the adoption fee, but doesn't ever actually have to have the pet enter your organization, okay? And we've set very difficult but not impossible goals for that, right? I think 100,000, rehomes in the year, and it goes up year after year. But what that does is that motivates the team to really stretch, to really think about ways that we can make this difficult but not impossible goal happen. An impossible goal is not a goal at all. People just throw their hands up, right? A ridiculously easy goal is also not a goal at all. It's like, well, we could do that in our sleep. You're not getting any of the benefit of it. So the pros of having a stretch goal is it inspires your staff to go a little bit further. And you can say to yourself, well, everyone's already working as hard as they can, right? But the truth is, if we knew that if we just did something a little bit different, we could meet this goal, you'll find that sometimes people will come up with an idea they didn't have or put in a little more effort that they didn't put in. That's the power of a stretch goal. I don't know if any of you are runners, right? And if you ever time yourself on a run. So you probably go for a run every day and you're tired when you're done. But if I actually timed you and said, I notice every day you do this run, it takes 20 minutes, do you think we could do it in 19? Ooh, that's a stretch. But that'll make you run faster, and maybe you'll be able to do it in 19. So another benefit of the stretch goal is it can inspire donors. If it's an inspirational goal, people will rally around that. If people know what you're trying to do this year and they believe it, they can rally around it. The con that you have to watch out with the stretch goals is you might not make it, okay? So this is where you've got to have strength, okay? You've got to understand that be willing to set a goal that maybe you're not going to make. That's not a failure. If you never fail to achieve your goals, you are setting low goals. Does that make sense? Okay, so it's worth it. And the thing I would say about stretch goals is maybe certain goals you wouldn't want to share with your donors. Might want to be an internal goal because maybe for some reason you don't want to be seen to be failing or something. That's up to you. It's up to your development people. But stretch goals are powerful for your internal team. And by the way, Ellen, you can jump in at any moment. Ellen just winds me up and she knows I'm going to go, and she's brilliant and she's behind me, but I talk a lot, so I'm inviting you to jump in at any moment. Okay, so the measurement. Remember our car analogy again? We know where we're going. We know when we want to get there. Now we have to have some gauge of knowing how fast we're going. Are we there? And you maybe have heard this, that's what's called a key performance indicator. It's the measurement, okay, or KPI, maybe you've heard. So the KPIs are your measurements that show your progress. And it's important to note with KPIs, it's not just having them. You need to pay attention to them. You need to have someone who owns them, and you need to have regular check-ins to say, how are we doing? I mean, what good is having a speedometer on your car if you don't ever look at it? Some of you are probably saying, well, that's why I get tickets all the time, right? So that's the value of having that, is actually being able to pay attention to it and understand how fast you're going, okay? And we're going to talk a lot about how do you decide on key performance indicators? What should you be measuring? All right, so measuring is a really interesting thing. I'm going to go through a couple of things really quick. And measuring the right things is very, very important. So whenever possible, measure outcomes and not efforts. So for example, you might say, oh, we've set a goal. We're going to have 3 adoption events this year, 3 major adoption events this year, something like that, or 10, right? That's an effort, but that's not an outcome. What if not a single pet gets adopted? Did you succeed? Right? So it would be better to set a goal saying, we're going to have 3 major adoption events and we're going to try to adopt out 1,500 animals, or something like that. Something that you could actually say has a pass or fail nature to it. So now it's actually meaningful. Just as another idea, in my world of the website, right, adoptapet.com, we could say our goal is to get more traffic to the website, to see your pets, right? But actually, if that was our goal, there's lots of ways we could get traffic to the website. We could put out an ad saying, we'll give you $1 million. We could turn it into a porn site, okay? We could do anything to get traffic to the website, right? So that's not the goal, really, is it? Our goal is to get people into the website, to get them engaged with your pets, and actually to get them to communicate with you and adopt pets. So it's not always obvious what the goal is if you press a little further to understand what's the actual outcome you want from this, right? So another example, like we send out millions of new pet alert emails. We could say we want to send out 1 million more new pet alert emails to people who came to our site. But if no one is clicking on them or adopting a pet because of them, who cares? So our goals will always be, what's the outcome you want from that? One other thing I just thought I would, throw out there for you. Some of you might have spay-neuter programs. You could say, if I were to throw out to you and say, oh, there's 2 organizations, and one of them spent money and did 100 surgeries, and another one spent less money and did 200 surgeries, is that enough information to know which one was more impactful towards the goal of their organization, towards a better live release rate or a no-kill? It seems like it is, right? But consider this. What if the group that did 200 surgeries was doing surgeries of pets that were never going to reproduce anyway? Okay? Pets that were in homes, no one was intending to reproduce them, they're live in an apartment, maybe it's an older pet, so it only had a couple of cycles of births left in him or her, right? So if you think about it, well, wait a second. If you really were to do a spay-neuter surgery, you want to be asking, should you be doing females, should you be doing males? I have an opinion on that. I believe it's females. We'll talk about it sometime. We could be saying, well, we should be focusing on younger animals. We should be focusing on animals that maybe live in areas that, so there's all kinds of things you could do. So to simply say we did 100 surgeries and paid a certain amount of money, maybe you should be paying people to get the people who wouldn't bring the pet to you anyway, right? So be careful when you look at what your numbers are and push through and understand what's the actual goal you want, because sometimes it's not obvious what you should be measuring, okay? Are there important precursor actions or outcomes that can be measured? So sometimes the end goal, like for example, we're going to measure our live release rate. Okay, well, what are you going to do to change it? Well, there's precursor things to change that, like measure increases in adoptions, measure decreases in returns, measure decreases in, or measure your ability to redirect people at the door. There's all kinds of things that you would measure as precursors to that if you get those numbers working right, your final number is going to work better. Does that make sense? Okay. Made sense to Mary. Be sure you're getting the data that you need, okay? So you got to ask yourself, well, what information would I need to know if this is a success? And that information may be embedded in your shelter software. It may be something that you need to start gathering, like asking people a survey or something. You need to be sure that you have the data that you need to understand what you're measuring, okay? And we can give more examples of that. Everything is an assumption until it's proven. This is important to remember. Like, for example, if you believe that spay-neuter surgeries are the thing to do, and so that's an assumption. If you don't know that your community, that actually the animals entering into your shelter are the result of unwanted pregnancies that could be solved, by providing some sort of a spay-neuter program, then that's an assumption for you. And it may not be true in certain communities, or not to the extent that you think it is, right? So be careful when you state things as fact that you don't actually have data to back up, okay? Go ahead and get the data. You might be surprised. I have this happen to me all the time. Things I'm sure of, when we actually measure it, it's just not right. And let the data guide you. Everything is a test. This is another thing that's important to remember. When you're going to do a program, or you're going to start something new, or you're going to make some effort, if you view it as a test, right, and not as, we're just going to do this, okay? But if you do it as a test, a couple things can happen. Number one, people who might otherwise fight you will be more willing to just give it a try. It's a test, right? Maybe they're right. They're saying this is a waste of time. I don't want to bring in this new procedure for eliminating distemper in my shelter, or something Elle and I were talking about, right? But if someone is resisting that, and you can say, well, let's just do this as a test, right? And it'll probably prove that you're right. We shouldn't be doing this. But people will agree to a test. The other thing is, when you set out to test something, right, by definition, what are you probably going to do to know if the test worked? You're going to get data. You're going to measure it. If you say it's a test, the obvious next thing is, well, how did the test go? Right? So always thinking everything is a test gets you in the mental habit of understanding you got to collect data about something and understand if this is actually helpful and useful. Okay? Change one thing at a time to understand causality. So if you're trying to understand why your adoption, how to get your adoptions to go up, and you do 4 different things in the same month, right, at the same time, maybe your adoptions do go up, but you might not know which of those 4 things made the adoption go up. Does that make sense? And here's a bigger problem with that. Maybe 2 of those things were positive, made adoptions go up. 1 didn't do anything, and 1 of them made adoptions go down. but not down far enough to counteract the 2 things that made it go up. That's the trick in data. So it's always good if you're going to change something and experiment, try to change one thing at a time and understand, is that the cause of what we're seeing? Consider and account for external variables, right? Maybe this month your live release rate went down, okay? Does that, by definition, mean that you've done something wrong? Maybe there was a firing, maybe a plant shut down in your city, and a lot of people lost their jobs, and so your intake went way up. Okay? So maybe all your programs are working, you're moving in the right direction, but something has pushed those numbers down that has nothing to do with you. Okay? So it's important to consider, what are the external variables? The economy, something that's happening in my community, maybe something another shelter's doing that's raising interest in cats, and now our cat adoptions are going up because of what that other shelter's doing. Try to pay attention to that to understand whether the thing you're measuring is actually changing because of what you're doing. Okay? And it's important to know that if you get data, if you start measuring things, that's not only allowing you to understand, are you having a positive effect, and then double down on that effect, right? You can't make something better if you don't know how good it is, right? I can't tell you that I'm running faster than I used to run if I can't tell you how fast I used to run. Okay? I would have no way of knowing that. But it empowers you with other people. And again, coming back to some of the people who may be standing in your way, some of the people who may be a little bit reticent for change because this is the way that they've always done it. And we have a real hard problem in our movement, don't we? Because people sometimes have been doing something a certain way for a long time. And if you come to them and say, let's try this different way, I think we'll save more lives, that kind of implies that extra lives have been dying because they didn't think of this before. I mean, it kind of puts people in a little bit of a defensive position. They get a little cognitive dissonance, right? So you need to take their hand in that situation and say, hey, listen, that was great. That got us to here. Let's look at the data. This is telling us a path forward. This can get us to here. Let's go ahead and make the next step. Okay? So the data empowers you when you talk to people. It becomes less of a he said, she said, and more of a look at the numbers, look at what's happening. Let's build this out again as a test. Okay, make your goals real. And again, you can jump in anytime if you want. Ellen. Okay, so make them visible, unless, like I say, it's a sensitive goal that you think you might not hit and you're doing it for your team, and maybe you don't want to make that one. That's up to you. But generally, for your team, you want to make them visible. You want to break up the big goals, like the live release rate, into smaller goals. Okay, saying, okay, what are the components of that if we did it would make that? You want to set milestones. So if this is our goal in a year, well, what's your goal in 6 months? Well, if that's your goal in 6 months, what's your goal for this month? Is there a ramp-up period before you can start doing this program? Okay, so your goal for this month is maybe finish the ramp-up period. And next month, it's start the program, right? So having those milestones makes it very clear where you're trying to go. Record the progress. Have a strong why. So understand why you're doing this program, why you're taking this effort, so you can explain that to your staff. And again, I'll tell you, the magic of saying it's a test. It's hard for people to say, I don't want to test something. It's really hard to say that. Okay? And set a time, whether it's each week or each month, to review. This is one of the big problems that people have sometimes, is they'll set goals and they'll set metrics and then they'll forget about them because life takes over, right? So someone has to own that. Someone has to own who is going to make sure that we're taking a look and we're doing a regular weekly. In my organization, Adopt a Pet, we do a regular monthly check-in. We have goals. We have goals on the year. Each department has their goals. Every month we meet with the heads of the department and we ask them, are you feeling like you're on track, not on track, or somewhere in the middle? And for us, that's green, red, yellow, right? And I put it on a spreadsheet and I can look across the whole organization and say, damn, we're looking red. Something's going wrong here. What's the problem? Or look, we're green across the board. And green is good, but green might also mean low goals. We set our goals too low, and I've done that after the first quarter saying, we're too green. You guys, we're capable of better than this. I should see some red in there. I should see some yellow at least. Okay?
David, I can add to that if you'll go back.
Yes.
So do you guys know why companies put that sign up? Do you guys know why they put that up there? Almost every company that does heavy machinery and warehouse type work, and it's because it motivates people to try to reach that goal. Even though it's asking them to not do something, it's empowering to see the goal and to watch those numbers go up every day and not be the one that blows it. So I think that's something we can use in our industry if we're trying to reach certain goals, and just put them on the wall, because this inspires people to do more.
Yep. And it not only inspires the people in your organization to do more, but if you let the public see it, it lets them know, hey, this organization has an audacious goal and we should help out, right? It makes the public feel a part of it. It makes other people who are maybe not in your organization understand your team is pitching together to do something, maybe I can help out. Okay, so your KPIs, your key performance indicators, as we mentioned, only work if someone's paying attention to them. Someone needs to own them. So pitfalls could be people just lose track of them. So if you set too many goals, okay, we're going to track 50 things. Tracking 50 things, if one person tracks that, it's tracking nothing. That's just some spreadsheet somewhere that someone produces that no one's going to look at. You really have to hone in on a few key things. There is a system that some of you may know about called OKRs, Objectives and Key Results. You should look it up. I'm not going to go into it. But that's a really good, simple system for picking a few key things and measuring them. Only 27% of leaders use data to make decisions. And I'm hoping that that's true. Okay? Ellen tells me it is. But I'd be surprised if it's even that high, to be honest. And so don't be a part of that 73% who don't, right? This word data, people toss it around, and if you're not a kind of a numbers person, you can get a little bit, just like data, I don't know, spreadsheets, numbers, or whatever. Don't have that attitude towards data. It's just truth, okay? Data is objective truth, if it's measured properly, okay? So it's a chance to assign some actual knowledge to what we think is true. That's what data does for us, okay? Leadership matters. Obviously, that's a big key in all of this, right? We're talking to you, and I think some of you are probably the leader of your organization. Some of you might be the leader of a department. Some of you might be working within an organization. Some of you might be just a volunteer and not have a lot of power in your organization. But wherever you are and whatever role you're in, it's really helpful when the leadership, the top of the organization, agrees with what we're talking about here, when they take ownership of it. Because once they take ownership of it, then it permeates through the whole organization. So there's really no good substitute for leadership. And some of us sometimes have to do, going back to my jiu-jitsu stuff I mentioned, we call it fighting from the bottom. Like you're in a bad position, but you have to learn how to fight from there. Sometimes we're fighting from the bottom, right? Where the leadership is not seeing what we need them to see, and we have to figure out ways to enroll them, to get them to put their guard down and try something new. Remember, test. Right? Okay. So, we talked during the conference about the 3 R's. Do all of you remember that? Okay, if you don't, that's okay. So the 3 R's were results, responsibility, and resources. So using that model, what we've just been talking about, the goals, where you want to be, right? That's the result. That's what we want to get to. That's a change in your live release rate, a change in your adoptions. Hey, it's also can be a change in your income, right? But I'll tell you something I've noticed, and I'm sure you know this to be true. I'll tell you right now, any organization, any nonprofit on the planet, if they have goals set around one thing, what do you think they have goals set around? Fundraising is what I've seen, okay? The good ones definitely have goals around adoptions, right? And that's the first thing that they can see. But in my talking to organizations, they definitely have a goal for fundraising, okay? The bigger organizations, right? And that's understandable, right? Because if they don't get their act together on that, they're not even going to have an organization. But why should that be more important than the actual mission work? If you're smart enough to have a goal for your fundraising, right, and to have metrics that you're being, that you're setting out for your fundraising goals, well, why aren't you smart enough to do it for your life-saving goals, right? So that's the results. The responsibility are the KPIs and the check-ins. Okay, we're measuring. We're measuring. Are we measuring the right things? Who owns those measurements? Who is responsible for this? Are we checking in? That's the responsibility component. The resources are all the things that support that. Getting the right data, using that data. Do you have the right staffing? Volunteers is a big one. Sometimes volunteers is this wild card that sometimes can be a lot of effort, obviously, but can make your organization bigger than it seems like it is, right? So, and I know we were talking about that. Don't underestimate the power of a good volunteer program, okay? Especially for the right types of activities. By the way, I would include in volunteers advisors. I'm really big on advisors. I have this feeling like, well, let me ask you, do you think you're better at some important things now than you were, say, 2 years ago in your organization or personally? Okay, most people would say yes, okay? Well, what if you could have done that 2-year growth in 1 year? Okay? Wouldn't that be better? What if you could have done it in 6 months? Wouldn't that be better? Well, how do you do that? Get advisors who've already been there, who've taken their 2 years, and so that they can now, just like you could now tell someone else who's 2 years behind you, hey friend, do this, do this, do this. You're going to move a lot faster. There's people out there who can tell you that. Obviously, that's why you're here, right, to learn. But I'm talking about across all aspects of your business, okay, and all aspects of your organization. Okay, so Ellen had talked, was it you who had spoken about this? So Ellen had talked about setting a baseline against like what we'd call higher functioning organizations. You want to remind us?
Sure. So this is just a visual reminder of outcomes, and we don't talk about intakes on this slide, but we talked about it in the beginning. And this is really the result. You're going for these goals. And so if you can start planning based on what these percentages are and how far away you are from those percentages, then you can start developing the rest of your strategy.
Okay, so this is really this is like looking where you are on a map, right? And understanding, okay, well, this is where we're at, and this can help you set some realistic goals, right? I think sometimes people's eyes cross a little bit when we say, we want 100% live release rate, you know, or no kill or whatever. Okay, well, I don't know, can we do 86%? That seems doable. Can we do 87%? That 1%, that's a life. Okay, we all understand what that means, right? So having this is super valuable. You'll remember the 12 life-saving ingredients, okay? We won't necessarily go over all of them now, but this system of thinking in terms of a goal and a timeline to get there and a way of measuring if you're there could apply to any of this, right? So if we take, like, for example, adoptions. That's an obvious one, right? Setting goals around adoptions, that's pretty straightforward. Okay, we understand that because it's pretty easily measurable. Some things are not so easy to measure. Disease prevention is certainly measurable, right? Understanding your role, experimenting, trying some different things, seeing if you can prove that. I'm just reading randomly off of it. Intake diversion is measurable, right? But you've got to pay attention to that environmental factor. So you could say, we got better at intake diversion, but we also had more intakes because that factory shut down, right? So you got to pay attention to that. Any of these things, okay, you can put a goal against. You can usually put a goal against anything. I mean, really, think about it. What if it's very important that you have better cooperation from your city council, okay? Everyone wants to have better cooperation from the city council, especially if you're a public entity or you're working with the local shelter. So you could set a goal against that. You could say, you know what, there's 5 city council members. I want 3 of them to be on our side. And if someone gave me that goal, if someone just said to me, we want to have better relations with the city council, I might go meet with the city council and try to explain to them what to do. But if someone said, David, you got 6 months. I want 3 people to stand behind us on this issue. I would start thinking, okay, what can we, I would want to meet them. I would want to understand who are the 3 likely candidates. What is it that they really want and what can they get from the shelter? Can we do a positive media event with them? Who are their husbands, wives, sisters, daughters that might maybe love animals that we can get to love animals? Should we name a pet after them? Should we do a big positive media event? Like if I knew that I got 3 months and get these 3 people to say yes to this thing, that would be a very specific thing. So you can set goals against anything. Okay, so just a quick experiment. If I were to ask you, what are the goals of your organization, right? You don't have to necessarily shout them out, but think about that. Most people, when I say that, will probably interpret that to mean, what's your ultimate goal? Like most people would say, oh, our goal is to, end the killing of pets and have a community, but I'm talking about the specific goals of your organization, the measurable ones, okay? So think to yourself, does your organization have measurable goals? Some of them do, some of them don't, that have been articulated, and do you know what they are, right? Maybe if you're the head of the organization, you do, but everyone in the organization should understand it because everyone wants to pull in. So Are they pass-fail? So I don't like the word fail, remember, because if you're setting a tough goal, you might not make it. That's not really a fail. But you understand what I mean by pass-fail. Is it clear that you made it or didn't make it? So if the goal is to help animals, remember you helped animals when you fed your cat this morning? That's not a measurable goal. It's what we're all trying to do. That's more like a vision, right? So at adoptapet.com, at Adopt-A-Pet, we have a vision, right? The way we articulate it is every pet that enters a shelter leaves through the front door, period. Okay, that's our way of saying, you get what it means, like animals are not dying in shelters unless, obviously, if there's an injury or, absolutely, they're dangerous to people, we understand that. But that's kind of our vision. Our mission, the way we achieve that is remove obstacles. That's what we try to do. We're trying to remove obstacles from people to find your pets and get to you and adopt your pets, right? And then we have very specific goals, numerical goals. So if you have goals and if they're pass-fail, the next question to ask is, what is blocking you? Okay? How are we on time?
Good.
Yeah, how much more time? 15 minutes? 10 minutes?
20, I think. 20
minutes. Okay, so I think we can open it up a little bit if we want. Yeah? So I want to pause for a second, and Ellen and I were wondering, are any of you having a problem or first of all, do you have any questions about this, the stuff that we've been talking about? Maybe I can answer them quickly. If not, I'll just say, hey, let's talk after. But are there any goals that you want to share that you have that you're struggling with or you're not clear how would you measure something? We'd be happy to hear it and take a crack at it if you want. Anyone want to share? Yes, there's someone in the back. Employee satisfaction. Beautiful goal, okay, to have employee satisfaction. Because one thing that I've learned, and I'm sure you know this too, and Christy Metropole and I were just talking about it last night, which is, at the end of the day, really at the beginning of the day, you need the right team, okay? If you don't have the right team, everything else is going to be really, really hard. The right team is positive people, wanting to be there, good at what they do, right? So employee satisfaction is one way of understanding, are people positive? Are they happy here? A happy person is going to work better than an unhappy person. We all know that to be true. So the normal way that that's measured is by some sort of survey, right? But you do need to be careful because people will not always be honest directly. So usually the best way to do that is through some sort of a anonymous survey that is conducted by a third party. So someone else comes in and says, they will conduct the survey, it'll be anonymous, people can write, and people can even talk to them if they want. Because some people want to be anonymous, but they actually want to talk a little bit, and maybe someone wants to talk back to them. So I think measuring that is very, very important, and that would be my suggestion on how to do it. Yes?
Growing our board is something that we've been struggling with.
Okay, so growing your board, when we talked about advisors and help, having a good, functioning, powerful board is a wonderful thing, right? And I don't have to tell you, having a bad functioning board is just impossibly difficult to deal with, okay? Especially if you're at the head of the organization. So setting a goal against that, I would be saying, and Ellen, feel free to jump in, but I would be saying, you had to understand what it is that you want. Like, who are you trying to add and why? So what does success look like? A good way to figure out a goal, by the way, is to understand what would be successful, what we'd call successful. So if you're saying, oh, I wish we had a fill in the blank, a lawyer on the board. I wish we had a wealthy person on the board. I wish we had a celebrity on the board or whatever. If you're clear on what you mean by expanding the board, like what does success look like, that'll help you hone in to say, okay, this is what we want. And now we're going to do it, and then we'll create some path to do it. We want to try and get it done within 6 months. And once you put that time pressure on it, you can then bring that out to your organization, put it out into your community, and begin that process. There's a whole, in terms of, it's a different discussion of like how you vet people for your board, and we can talk about that if you want.
One tip that I think is really helpful is thinking about over the last 6 months, what do you wish the board had done? And then write that down and work backwards and try to get people that can accomplish those things done.
Mm-hmm. Mary?
So how do we measure the impact of what we do where we're not actually the ones doing it? As a funder, we provide grants, but we're very interested all the time in trying to understand what the impact is of the dollars we invest.
Yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? Because the question was, if you're a funder, okay, how can you measure the impact of what you're doing because you're a bit removed from it, right? So how would you know as a funder what your impact is? So this is of course tricky, right? Because a lot of times the organizations that you're funding may not fully know what their impact is. So how are you supposed to know? So my answer to that, as someone who has not been a funder, a little bit, and we give away little stuff, but who's there? Okay, it's my mom. My answer to that would be it obviously has to start with the people you're granting have to get good at measuring their impact. So we have to be clear on what that impact is, right? And once they can do that, then you can measure your impact. So I would engage in a whole discussion, which I'd love to have with you, by the way, about, and it's as someone from an organization that's actually taken money from you, like how we would gauge the impact and how we could do that. But I think it starts with, for funders, you know, funders often ask questions like, you know, how was the money spent? And that's important to know. Like how many adoptions, how many, you know, spays, neuters, whatever it is they're funding for. It depends on whether it was a specific grant for a specific purpose or a generalized grant for your operations. And by the way, that's two different things too, right? So if it's just a generalized grant, but the point I think there is the organization has to be measuring its impact, and I would never give money to an organization that isn't. Which isn't to say I would shun them, it's to say I would help them measure their impact, right? I would say I'm going to help you understand how to measure your impact, and once we're good on that, I'll give you the money and we can measure your impact. That's my answer to that. Yes, loud.
How do you measure effective communication? I guess you could do something like structure your goals, and then kind of test them to see if they've actually understand those goals.
You're saying how do you measure your communication? Communication specifically around goals or all communication? Okay, so I mentioned that it's really important. Ideally, everyone in the organization would know the top line goals of the organization. Okay, and that's where I mentioned that system called OKRs, which you can look up if you want. There's a lot of good information about that. So it's easily understandable goals. I think the way that you would do that is you would communicate it and you would ask people, you know, and we actually do that at meetings. We remind people, say, so it's not really a test. It's just someone gets a chance to come up and show that they remember what we're talking about. But you could do a little survey on that. You know, every 6 months, and we just did it at our organization, we do a survey and I can send you the questions if you ask me. They're probably relevant to an animal shelter, but or a rescue group, but it's a survey of all these things like, are you clear on what your goals are? Are you clear on what the organization's goals are? Will you still be here, do you think, in 2 years? And what would have to change for that answer to change, whether you said yes or no, right? What do you think our culture, how would you describe our culture? It's all of these things that's an anonymous survey that gives our leadership insight as to what exactly is going on. And it's always super helpful, right? We often feel some good about the things, and then some other things we're like, whoa, that's a problem, I didn't even know that. So I think those kinds of anonymous surveys are good to ask people, and then you'll get a sense for what's going on.
And I would add to that to do those in serial. So do one a quarter or one every 6 months, and then you can track your progress. And if you use Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, they'll give you graphs, and you can get really easily digestible information to make decisions on.
I should also just mention, we use, again, we're techie stuff, but it's pretty inexpensive. We use this system called 15-5, and it's called that because it's supposed to take 15 minutes for the person to fill out and 5 minutes for the supervisor to fill out. And every week or 2 weeks, depending upon the person and the department, they get this email saying, answer the survey, and it's always the same. There's always the same questions. How are you feeling about work? How are you feeling about life? Then we can put in some extra questions, whatever we want, and then it graphs and it tracks, because we're remote. Right? So we don't actually work in the same place. So we have no good way of just taking the pulse of the office because there's no office. So if you're a remote organization, something like a 15-5 is pretty good because it actually gives you data and you can run graphs and you can see is happiness generally going up, going down, or whatever.
Can I have one other thing is nobody wants to do the survey when they think they're doing badly, but you need to do it now so that you have a baseline so you can see what your improvement is.
Right. And you'll be amazed that when a difficult employee leaves, how that makes everyone else's happiness go up. Build the right team. Okay, how about one more? Yes.
A lot of organizations, they haven't collected data yet. I see this a lot. And so to set goals for the first time without history, what would you recommend to those organizations?
So if your organization hasn't been collecting data yet and you want to set goal for the first time, how would you set it? So first of all, it helps to obviously have data on which to set goals, right? So when you have your key performance indicators, you have something to measure, you can set a goal against that, right? So when in the driving analogy, right, if I have an odometer and I have a speedometer, so I could say, oh, okay, I want to go this amount of miles, right? So I have something to actually measure the amount of miles, right? But I think that the first time that you're setting goals, I think you make it up. And by the way, a lot of times you are making it up. That's what a goal is, right? You're making it up. You're trying to make up something that is a stretch, that is not impossible, but it's reasonable, it's inspirational, and you might get it totally wrong. But you know what? It's better that you do it. So I would say you just make it up. And then you discover 3 months in that, wow, this is really off, and then you adjust it. And that's how every organization starts. I've worked with a lot of organizations, that's how they get it going. Okay? And don't be afraid to just make it up, because remember, goals are not some magic thing, right? This is just a framework to help smart, committed people work better. And I promise you, same group of smart, committed people here and here, one has goals and milestones and measurements and one doesn't, that's the one that's going to do better. Absolutely every time, guaranteed for sure. Can we get our slides back up? So what did we talk about? The empowerment, because we want this to actually work for you. Okay? Set measurable, high-level, and annual organization and program goals. You want to have goals at the department level, at the organization level, ideally based on your data compared to the best practices that Ellen showed, to try to get you close to these high-functioning organizations if you're not already there. That's results of the 3 Rs. Develop a plan with the milestones to reach the goal. Milestones are little sub-goals, like where are we going to be, where to get there. And I would just suggest that if your organization doesn't do this, just pick one department to do it in. Make it a test. Okay? Develop a plan with milestones to reach the goals. That's results. Set top line and precursor KPIs. So precursor meaning a thing that it probably leads to the other thing. So there's this one thing we're measuring, but we've noticed, so example could be we're total adoptions, right? But we want to measure specifically big dog adoptions because we think that thing maybe has a bigger impact on the numbers than other things do. So you start to dig into that. So that would be called a precursor KPI, a key performance indicator. And measure them against the milestones and the goals. Identify who owns the goal. Who's responsible for this? Okay, if no one's responsible for it, nothing gets done. So who's responsible for the goal? Who's responsible for looking at the key performance indicators and being sure that there's check-ins and transparency across the organization? And then identify the resources that you need. That's the methodology to get it done. And just to finish up, anything you want to say before I finish up? Okay, so I want to take a step back for a second because we're in the weeds of goals and all the different things that we can do at the organizations. And one thing I've noticed is people tend to forget how amazing they are. You tend to forget how amazing you are. That you are even attempting to be on this journey to bring to bear your skills and your passion to help the least powerful members of our society is an amazing thing, right? So cut yourself some slack. You're trying to do something. You could maybe you work in a bank, maybe you have another job too. But here you're actually trying to do something that's good for the world. I work at a website, okay? So I feel very, very lucky. I don't deal with distemper. I don't deal with parvo. We do deal with some screaming adopters, but they're screaming on the computer, so we're kind of far from them, okay? But I'm serious. What you're doing is so amazing, and I think people sometimes forget to acknowledge that, okay? To forget to understand it and forget to pat themselves on the back. So if you're not patting yourselves on the back, I'm going to pat you on the back, because I'm patting you on the backs right now. And the thing is, what we're talking about, this system of like having goals and milestones and metrics, good businesses all use that, right? This stuff comes from, the Uber of the world and Nike and selling their product, and they can pay the top and best people. But I'll tell you what, animals deserve as good of marketing and as good of goal setting and as good of results as tennis shoes, okay? As telephone apps, as Facebook does, okay? Those companies have a lot of money to pay people who are experts at that. We're not getting paid that kind of money. We're not getting paid that kind of money. But we can learn from those people. We can learn from that. And we can take those same systems that drive the most successful companies to their goal, which is profitability, and we can use them for our goal, which is saving lives and becoming no-kill. So thank you very much. Thanks, Ellen.
Thank
I
you.
really, really appreciate it.